Hey, Jason. It's Tracy Friedlander here from Crushing Classical Podcast. Congrats on your 10-year anniversary of Contrabass Conversations. What an extraordinary accomplishment. You rock. Here's to the next 10. I'm raising a glass to you. Great job. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Welcome to the second decade of Contrabass Conversations. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here today, and you can learn more about where we've been, where we are, where we're headed on our website, contrabassconversations.com. And I'm so excited to bring you this 10th anniversary episode of Contrabass Conversations. Man, I can't believe it's come this far. I had no idea what I was doing 10 years ago. It grew beyond my wildest expectations. I left it dying on the vine for years as I pursued other things, and I brought it back from the dead just a little over a year ago. What a decade, and I'm so excited to see what the future will bring. I mean, it's hard to even wrap my brain around how to approach an anniversary episode like this, but I'm really happy with how this thing turned out, and I hope you enjoy it. I'd like to thank my sponsors, D'Addario Strings. Thank you so much for sponsoring these podcasts, and check out their Zyx strings, which are synthetic core strings that produce an extremely warm, rich sound. You can get the sound and the feel of gut strings with more evenness, stability, and projection than real gut. And check out a link in our show notes for more about Zyx strings. And I'd also like to thank Rob Anzelotti of Bass Capos for providing hosting for Contrabass Conversations. And Bass Capos are a great choice for any bass player looking to implement a double bass extension. They're easy to install and adjust. They're cheaper and more reliable than the hand-built latches, and they're also quicker and lighter to operate. And you know what? At this 10-year juncture, I'd like to give a shout-out to all the former sponsors of the podcast that have been on this journey with me. And that includes Upton Bass, The String Emporium, Robert Riccardi, Discover Double Bass, Douglas Mapp Music, and Classic Contrabass. And all these folks took a chance on what, especially back in the day, was really uncharted waters. So thank you guys for stepping up in this role. And thank you to all of you who've listened over the years. This might be your first episode, or maybe you've been on board since I relaunched sometime this year, or maybe you're an OG listener from way back in 2007. Regardless of when you came on board, thank you so much for following along. You're the reason I do this, and I'm just so thankful for all the emails, the phone calls, the likes, the shares, and just all the good wishes I get every week. So thank you, and feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. So we're going to start today's episode with a clip from the very first podcast, and that was released exactly 10 years ago on January 1st, 2007. Just a little bit of it. Enjoy.
Contrabass Conversations, Episode 1. Hello, and welcome to Contrabass Conversations, life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. Contrabass Conversations is a new show devoted to double bass interviews, news, recordings, and resources. Basically, all things bass. You can contact us via email at contrabassconversations@gmail.com. You can call us to leave a voicemail at 206-666-6509, or you can visit us at our website, contrabassconversations.com, where you can click the voicemail button to leave a voice message. This is primarily going to be an educational podcast. I've for a long time, I've been interested in creating some sort of resource of interviews with prominent double bass players. I'm really interested in interviewing professionals. I'm interested in interviewing students. I'm interested in talking to jazz players, classical players, bluegrass players, people that teach at universities, people that teach privately. There are so many people in this field that I think have some experiences to share that would be valuable for double bass players. And that's really the goal of this show, is to get that information out there. When I was younger, I wish I could hear prominent double bass players talk, at any time about taking auditions, practicing excerpts, what to practice in certain excerpts, what solos to learn, what solos are expected of you, what solos are expected of you in the United States for professional auditions. How about solos in Europe? There are so many issues for the double bass, and I think that this will be a great venue to talk about them.
Well, there it is, episode number 1. And, I think I re-recorded that dialogue 4 or 5 times. It was just so awkward to hear myself on tape. At this point, I'm totally used to how I sound. I'm immune to the sound of my own voice, thankfully. And hundreds of episodes, that's good practice for sure for that sort of thing. And thinking about this 10th anniversary podcast, there's one person that I really wanted to connect with for this show, and that's John Grillo. So what you're going to hear the rest of this episode is a conversation that I had a couple weeks back with John about all that we've done together these past 10 years. And he's the person responsible for moving this show from a freelancer in Chicago, kind of awkwardly talking into a microphone, to where it went and where it is today. And interspersed with my talk with John are some phone calls from listeners and former guests and a couple of clips from some past episodes that John and I are talking about. And after all of this, I'll wrap up with a couple brief thoughts about where I see things headed. Now, I hope you enjoy this special anniversary episode as we look back at the past 10 years.
Hey, Jason, this is Lloyd Goldstein in Tampa, Florida. It may seem like a crazy thing to do on Thanksgiving morning, but after my workout on the elliptical, I did my yoga practice listening to your most recent podcast with Florian, and it's nuts. But doing yoga and listening to podcasts has become a regular routine for me. So and also working out at the gym. So I am so grateful for all that you share and all the amazing people and information and inspiration from the bass world. So happy Thanksgiving, Jason. I send my love from Tampa, Florida. Take care.
I was thinking, how do I celebrate this kind of anniversary? And the first thing that popped into my mind was getting on the line with John Grillo, who's been with me since the beginning of this whole journey. I put up the first episode of the podcast January 1st, 2007, and I think that John emailed me within that first week, right around there. We had met at the Pacific Music Festival about 7 years before then, and one thing led to another. I interviewed John. He was my first interview out of Chicago. He was the third guest on the podcast. And we look now where we've come. He's been on 30 episodes, some of the most popular, influential episodes, and we're going to dig into that. And I'm just so thrilled to have John for the 31st time on Contrabass Conversations. So welcome, John.
Jason, good morning. Wow, it's awesome to be here.
It is great to be here. This is like, I just have had so much fun doing these with you over the years. And John and I were talking before we got going here and just looking at some of the numbers. And it's just wild. We're coming up on 200,000 downloads. And to set the scene, this is the end of 2016 right here. 200,000 downloads on which John has appeared. And looking at some of the other numbers, Ed Barker, principal bass of the Boston Symphony, our interview with him, that one alone is coming up on 10,000 downloads. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around those numbers.
Well, and I think you said in 188 countries, too. Yeah. So this is really an international, global effort, which is really great. And I think, I think one of the reasons for the success of all this is I think we kept the message very positive and very focused from an educational standpoint. I think that leads to this lasting impact because, the younger students and just, as musicians, we always can benefit from, just inspiration and different ideas and just to keep us going, when times get tough or, you hit sort of some rough spots in your playing or in your particular orchestra or ensembles and that kind of thing. So I think just the positive educational message has just really been great.
Yeah, and the lasting impact thing, that's the sort of thing that I didn't really, like a lot of things in life, you don't really, hindsight is 2020, you know, I had no idea that it would have the kind of lasting impact. And like you mentioned, like all the different countries that people listen to this in, 188 countries, I can't even conceive of that. And I've gotten so many messages from people from Australia, Kazakhstan, Indonesia, rural areas in the U.S., South America, I mean, just all over the globe, saying where they listen to these, how it's benefited them, and it's remarkable. So John and I are going to just kind of take a look at where we came from, and then talk about where we are now and where we see things going in the future. And one thing that, besides being the third guest, John's recital was the first music that we feature on the podcast. I put out his recital showcase the week after put out the first part of his interview. And thinking back, it's hard to think 10 years back is a long time by any metric, but in technology, I mean, we're like looking at the dark ages 10 years ago. And now there's YouTube to such a degree that like just putting up tracks of a recital you've played, that's like second nature to people. But that was a gutsy thing to do in 2007, early 2007. Do you remember what inspired you to do that, John?
Actually, I don't know. I just think, you know, we did the interview and then we just wanted to sample my playing, you know, and then maybe we just had sort of the foresight, you know, we said, look, you know, the technology of music has just changed. You know, it's just, that was sort of when, you know, I guess iTunes sort of came about, right? That was iTunes was already happening and that sort of thing. But, you know, and I think in the beginning nature of this, we just had a very sort of healthy, sort of organic start to all this, you know.
Yeah.
I think if you remember that, it just, our chemistry always just worked really well. And, And I think we did our interview, and we just thought, you know, I should just showcase my playings. And I think people kind of respected that because, you know, in classical music, we're always so sort of scared to sort of share our playing, you know, I think if you have a folk guitarist or, you know, say like a blues singer or something, you know, they'll do anything to just sort of, you know, showcase their playing.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, what's important is that what I would like to almost, you know, just point out to people again is that we did a lot of sort of specialty episodes that featured my playing also, like, you know, besides the interview. So, you know, your book, Winning the Audition, you know, I think that's an awesome, you know, follow-up on many of our interviews. But I think we should just spend a little bit of time talking about the orchestra excerpt episode and the opera episode and that sort of thing. Okay, now with this Salome, I think what happens in this story, if I remember correctly, is that this passage comes right after John the Baptist is beheaded. So I can never get that out of my head before I start playing this. So, but just as four sharps, it's just there's a killer lick towards the end that you'll hear. So, but other than that, yeah, let's just hear it.
All right, here we go with John's recording of this excerpt from Salome.
Yeah, and so those specialty episodes, they're the flexibility of podcasting, just the medium of delivery. I think it's just a perfect fit for these kind of specialty episodes. We put out the orchestra excerpts pretty early on. It was within the first maybe 8-9 months of the podcast. And how did that work, John? Those were excerpts you'd recorded for something, and then we interspersed some dialogue. How did that one all work?
Yeah, now this is the orchestra excerpt breakdown is CBC 41. Mm-hmm. And then there's two versions of this. There's one that plays it as an entire podcast. Mm-hmm. And then what you did is you broke it down into individual tracks.
Yeah.
So that goes through the Beethoven, Brahms, Mahler, Schubert, Strauss, Verdi, that kind of thing. And then what we do is we talk, you know, very specific about just the details and, like, you know, how would you prepare it to playing, you know, as you were going to prepare it for performance. And these are just personal recordings of mine. You know, I must have been preparing for auditions or lessons or what have you, and I just recorded them myself, just home practice. But, I was really, it must have been right before something, so it was really sort of up and ready to go.
Yeah.
But I think the chemistry, I listened to these the other day, and I think the chemistry that we had and the way we talked about, just the crescendos and the music and, how we should approach it from, maybe bow articulation and that kind of thing, shifting, I think they're just very neat. And I think, you've had the feedback from that. And the opera one is the same. The opera program is number 62. Let me just double check that. Yeah, the CBC 62. And that was all from an opera audition I must have been doing.
Yeah.
And then and talk about that one. We want to also stress the environmental impact of all this, like how this has affected the world, and people have used this to their benefit. Tell that one story from that one person about the opera.
Yes, that's Lauren Pierce, and I'm sure she doesn't mind me mentioning her name. She's been on the podcast a couple times. At this point, she was preparing for an opera audition and sent me a message just out of the blue saying she was getting ready for this and was listening to this opera excerpt breakdown that we put out with John's playing and us talking about the excerpts. And she was just so thankful that was there and found it so helpful in the audition preparation process. And that's what kind of blows my mind about this whole accessibility and the reach of this medium, that you can be anywhere. You can be in Austin, you can be in Berlin, you can be in Queensland, and you can have equal access to this material. And you mentioned earlier, like, setting the scene in 2007 and iTunes and downloading these podcasts. And it's pretty cool to see how that's changed between 2007 and 2017. Now, most people listen to podcasts on their smartphones. I think it's 80% or over 80%. And they just can stream them from their smartphone or download them. So it's become much more of a click of the button medium. And it's just so exciting to me to see how that's changing all aspects of music making and just education. It's wild to see that happen. And it's so cool to see these excerpt breakdowns, the opera and the orchestra, and just the lasting impact they've had. I mean, in 2016, we're getting emails about something that was put out in 2008. How cool is that?
And then I think the sound quality was also pretty decent. And I think in those days that was mostly desktop. That was before I even had an iPad. So, I mean, all this stuff really started very desktop oriented.
Yeah.
I mean, that's before I even had an iPhone or any of that stuff. But, and we also did just a couple interesting discussions while the state of the orchestra. Hello, welcome today. This is John Grillo, and I'm accompanied by Jason Heath. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
Jason and I have done several podcasts for contrabassconversations.com, which is a weekly podcast of bass-related issues. And Jason is also the author of doublebassblog.org, and I have my own blog, which is classicalmusicnews.tv. But today we're going to sort of move beyond some of the things we talk about with bass and have a more general viewpoint of the orchestra business in general, which we're starting called the State of the Orchestra. And today we're going to talk about Jason's book. So Jason has recently came out with a book in the summer of 2008 that's called Road Warrior Without an Expense Account, Rethinking Music Performance for the 21st Century. And Jason, why don't you just tell me, what was your inspiration, your thoughts, and what was some of the process about coming up with your first book?
Sure. Well, this is a total outgrowth of my blog, doublebassblog.org. This was originally a 10-part series that I wrote on the blog about the music business and my frustrations with my sort of what I consider peon existence in the music business as a classical music freelance road warrior. And I like the idea for the title.
And we also had a really fun discussion that it was called Chatting About Orchestra and Opera Playing. I listened to that yesterday. That was really kind of neat too. Because with Jason and I, what we've been talking about is that coming up with different ways to focus on some of this old material. And you, one of your news programs, you said you used the term evergreen content. I think that was really really, really an important term, because I listened to some of the stuff we did yesterday, and it's just it could be today.
Yeah.
Especially the State of the Orchestra. I interview you about your first book, and it was just fascinating to hear, life as a musician. And I mean, I think for me, I didn't grow up in a musical family, so I learned all this stuff just sort of firsthand. I probably went to school and Juilliard and stuff in Indiana, and I remember I didn't even know what a gig was. I remember asking somebody that. Somebody said, "What? I have a gig," and I said, "What's that?" I didn't even know what that was.
Hello, Jason. This is Szymon Marciniak calling, and I was just going to congratulate you for your success and the long 10 years of your Contrabass Conversations. And I feel very honored that I could be part of it recently, actually, so not so long before your beautiful 10-year anniversary. And, I was following actually your podcast long before we met and long before we talked recently on the podcast, on the episode, but also in Prague. It's really great what you're doing. And, I remember one thing that you told me, because I was actually going yesterday, I was watching that video that you recorded on Facebook, and you were actually talking about all those guests that you were interviewing only in this year, 2016. When you just see a number like hundreds or something, you think, whatever. But then you actually started to go through all those names and tell about all those guys one by one. And I was like, wow, that's just incredible. When do you have time, energy to actually meet all those people and find out about them and interview them and really do all this enormous research? But I remember one thing that you told me when we were doing our interview, and I was actually saying how much I enjoy the things that you do, and you said one thing. You said, this is actually this kind of conversation that I would like to have over a coffee. And that's exactly what my impression has been, that this interest and this eagerness and curiosity that you actually show in your shows is very natural. It's very authentic in a way, and you really have this interest, you really have this curiosity, and I'm sure that by that you are actually fulfilling your passion. But in the same way, you're actually unifying us, the bass players, because it's so much more helping us to connect to each other and maybe get to know someone even on distance, and see or hear someone I would never maybe find out about otherwise. And so thanks for doing it, and I wish you many, many more years of great programs and guests on your podcast. So keep doing what you're doing, because it's great. So all the best, and happy anniversary. Thanks, Jason. Bye.
Yeah, so that's great. So then we sort of moved along, and then when did we sort of hit that sort of hiatus point? I think that's when you...
Yeah, that was in, you were with me from the beginning of the podcast right until that hiatus point. Some of the last things I put out before I just sort of switched careers for a few years were featuring some recordings that you had. We put out this Kusevitsky recordings episode and these Frederick Zimmerman practice tapes. And I remember you passing that material along to me. And even like we interviewing David Grossman, that was in 2009. That was one of the last interviews I did. Even Ed Barker was kind of near the tail end of that first phase of the podcast. So yeah, it's remarkable. And that term evergreen, which I love that term. It's so true for this kind of medium that we're talking about. Like an interview with Ed Barker from 2009 is as good now as it was in 2009.
Absolutely. And then I remember during that time, I would always send you emails. I was always kind of bugging you to come back, but I know life was hard. But another thing, people may see in some of my old work that, I used to have a blog called Classical Music News TV, but and I just want to mention, because, most blogs actually go into sort of a static phase, so it's really kind of hard to keep it going.
It is.
People probably have their own experience with that, whether it's a news or it's like anything, food or whatever in life, it just library, anything, like you get to it, it just sort of ends. It's most likely going to just phase out. So
yeah, and I think that's okay. To me, it's like seasons of your life, and for me, and I know you're similar, John. Like I always like to have a project I'm working on. Like I'm really not happy unless I've got some project, and some of these projects have been very public, like the podcast and the blog, and then some of them just haven't been as public. Like I went into teaching full time and spending 50, 60 hours at least teaching high school orchestra, which I loved. And then I got really into electronic music, and I spent hours and hours and hours every day teaching that and making beats and doing that. And then I as this San Francisco move loomed, I started thinking about these various projects, and I just sort of moved into another season of life, which just happens to be similar to what we were doing before. So it's just so fun to reboot this. And we featured and again, like not too long after I got it going, we featured you performing Per Questa Beamano on, I think it was 174, and another music episode, which is great to have you back in that capacity. And then talking with Joe Conyers back in May of 2016.
Yeah, and you also you did some from the archive stuff.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
I remember that came back, and also during the hiatus, this was still all online, so people were all listening to all the interviews from all the different teachers and the recitals and the stuff. So I mean, it was ever present. I mean. So, and then where we are now. So, I remember I got an email from you about this December last year, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And you said the app was coming around. So I don't want to talk about that because I know we were talking about we're coming up on it's the first anniversary of the app coming up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. In fact, right around now when we're talking is the first anniversary of the app, and the app has been huge for the growth of the show. And it was something that I was sort of planning a rebooting of the podcast for a few months, but I knew if I was going to go back in, I wanted to go back in firing on all cylinders and really do things right.
And maybe talk about the numbers. Why don't you mention some of the numbers when the app came around? The numbers, remember that 1 month where the numbers skyrocketed?
Yeah. So I logged into my statistics package for the podcast, and I thought that I was maybe being attacked by spam bots or something, or I didn't know what was going on. But there was like a day where my numbers went up by like 20 times what they normally are, and they've never gone down since. And it coincided with releasing the app, and then again talking about trying to do things right. I won't go into all the technical details, but I'd made it very hard. You really had to work hard to find these old episodes while I was on hiatus. Only the first 20 were even visible in iTunes or any sort of platform like that. So the only way you could find an episode would be to actually go to the site and dig through the archives and try. I don't even think I had a search box on the site. I mean, I was really in hiatus. Wow. Yeah. So it's remarkable. So kudos to anybody who found those episodes during that hiatus, that you were working hard for that, but making them rediscoverable like that. And then people discovering the show, downloading the app, subscribing on iTunes in different ways. Yeah. They just started going through and listening to the entire back catalog.
And it's another thing we can't forget, almost, to where we came from, where we are now, is that all the student resource material that's there. Mm-hmm. Remember the scales, and I think it was kind of amazing how I incorporated that into my own teaching. Mm-hmm. If something came up with people, if I was talking about articulation in a lesson, then I would have them listen to Ed Barker. Yeah. You had some jazz stuff. Yeah, the Andy Anderson visual, that goes back to when we first started. Mm-hmm. His virtual lessons. Yep. That was such a, leaving a first or second lesson with a new student, I would always leave that with their parents and stuff. They go right to it. Yeah. So maybe you have the scales on there. There's MIDI tracks. So if you want to just maybe, or even, what's the, is that on the blog, or that's more of a blog thing, right?
Well, I'll tell you, yeah, but all of that material is in the app, which I think is so cool. Like the app is the core content of the app, or the podcast episodes. And the app makes it really easy to access all this stuff. You can just search for any topic or any name or anything like that. If you put John Grillo in there, you'll get every single episode he's appeared on. If you put Spiccato on there. I always write about what the episode covers. So you'll find the episodes where we talk about that. And then all those videos that John was just talking about, the Andy Anderson, this 10-part virtual lesson series, which has been downloaded almost 1 million times. And that's a number totally independent from the podcast number. We're about to hit 2 million downloads for the podcast here at the end of 2016. That's not even counting those Andy Anderson. That's another million. So, yeah, I know. Isn't that insane? Those videos are all available in the app. And then scale sheets, practice resources, MP3 practice tracks, all that sort of stuff is in the app as well. So it's really, I designed it to kind of be a one-stop shop for bass players. And if you get it on the iPad or something bigger, it's a great size for reading the sheet music in there.
And there's just another, we can't forget to mention that it's also free. So you just go download it. I mean, I think it's really sort of focused the pod. It's changed the podcast. And, I go to it both ways. I'm either on the app, on iPhone, iPad, or I guess because in the old days we came to it via desktop. I mean, that works fine too, to retrieve some stuff. But, yesterday I had some time, so I was able to listen to, somehow I was listening to one of the specialty ones, State of the Orchestra maybe. And then right at the end, it's kind of neat with the app. It just streams right into the next one. Yeah. And I listened to the, I think it was part 2, Max Dimoff, and I haven't listened to it in a while, and it was just fascinating. Max was talking about how he used all these different bowing variations for preparing for auditions in his warm-up. And then that's when I sort of went, and in the show notes for a lot of the stuff on the app, that's where you could click on to, his shifting exercises and stuff. And I haven't done that in a while, but I mean, imagine the resources for young kids. You can get people scale regimens. I'm a big believer that like a lot of people we're not really taught how to practice. That's sort of, at least in the old method. You go to school. A lot of it kind of just depends on your own. What your teacher may recommend, or we form. We kind of just practice. I don't know. There's not that much sort of formal schooling on that, but I think for us, one thing, if you go through all of our interviews, at least one that I do, I always try to ask the teacher, like, how do you practice? So we really try to come from their sort of standpoint of how to play. Like in the Ed Barker interview, he has sort of like a 3 stages of his preparation, which is just sort of fantastic, like the learning phase, the practicing phase, and then the performing phase, And it's just, I've had some feedback on that. For some people to pick on, even if it's just that, what you take away from it, wow. I mean, that could really change the course of someone's development.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's something that I've just always admired about your interview style. You really do your research on every one of these people that we've talked with. And so you have a very clear framework to guide people through, like with Ed. I mean, and part of it is that you've had personal experiences with most of these people that we talked with, so you kind of knew what they could bring to the table that would really be valuable to people. And you're just so skilled from the very beginning at doing that, from Lawrence Hurst, our first conversation, all the way through all the people we talked with. So I congratulate you on that. That making that happen and making that look easy is a hard skill to master.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And I guess I'm just lucky. I'm just fortunate, I mean, I study with all these people. I know it's just crazy. But it's true. It's true. And I think maybe it's part of our personality. Like I like to try to get, inside people's minds and try to understand how they think. And I think we really achieve that with this, which is great.
Jason, my good friend, Adam Booker from the frozen northlands of Duluth, Minnesota. Congratulations on 10 years of Contrabass Conversations. You've been a source of inspiration for the past 10 years. Even during the quiet times, I would still go back and listen to certain podcasts. Got me through grad school, and now that I'm an educator, a teacher, it still helps me out almost every day. I get to hear something from some of the great bass players that you've collected in Contrabass Conversations, and I get to share that with my students. What you do is an amazing service for our instrument, and I appreciate it all. So congrats again on 10 years, and I look forward to the next 10. Thanks a lot, brother. Have a great one. Bye.
So let's see. So we're coming up on what? Coming up on the 300th?
So we're just on the cusp of 300 episodes, and this year alone, this will be the 100. I have this here somewhere. This will be the 125th show for the year. So this has really gotten rebooted in a serious way since getting going in late 2015. And it's exciting, like where we are now, and then like looking into the future, where we're going. I'd love to talk about that with you a little bit. And something before we flipped on the mic that we were talking about is the challenge. I think about this a lot, of highlighting this evergreen content that we're talking about. These Ed Barker interviews, Max Dimmoff interviews with these major figures in the world of bass, and finding a way to bring that content back up to the surface that people can discover it. It's a challenging thing for sure.
Yeah, but I think we're sort of on a good start with that. I mean, in some ways, your new book, Winning the Audition, and I also want to thank you. You dedicated it to me, and that's a real honor to me. I'm very touched by that. I appreciate that. It's been awesome doing this with you, by the way, just for the record. It's a special experience. But you're sort of the winning of the audition is a way. I mean, I think that's sort of a harvest of all this. I mean, bringing back old material, and I'm just excited to get that in book form.
Yeah, there's something powerful about having it and holding it in your hands. There's something powerful about text still, and this is coming from, I love the digital world. I spend most of my life in that world, but there is something, and there's something cool personally when you write a book and it arrives and you're actually holding the physical manifestation of your thoughts. And in the case of Winning the Audition, not only partially my thoughts, mostly all these dozens of people that we talked with. And yeah, that really was kind of the end result of me gnawing on this problem, as I saw it, of highlighting this evergreen content. I mean, how do you find all these nuggets from Owen Lee and Max Dimmoff and Ed Barker and Larry Hurst in these days and days of material? I didn't tell you the statistic before we started, John, but if you listened to everything I put out in 2016, start to finish, 5.5 days of straight listening. So,
wow.
And I guarantee you that there are people. I know. I guarantee you that there are people listening that have listened to all 5.5 days this year. So thank you for spending 5.5 of your precious days with me. But that just sort of illustrates the problem. And there's so much great content in there. So Winning the Audition was part one of what I see being many, many different series going forward. The idea of taking a certain topic and exploring multiple perspectives from past guests. And I have dozens and dozens of ideas for topics like that going forward.
Okay, what's cool? I just got a great idea. This is something we should work on. We should make a book out of my specialty content here.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, or do something out of that. We should definitely do that. We should just do the same thing for that.
That's a great idea.
It's different. It's totally different than the interviews, but maybe that would be kind of neat. I've always joked with Jason, I might as well just say it, about the Contrabass Manifesto.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But I know that's going to be controversial. But another thing I also would like to do was, as part of that, it could be a series of stuff. I would also like to get into doing some biographies of some of the epic teachers and players too. Now, for some reason in music, in the old days you do Leonard Bernstein biography, autobiography or biography. But in the beginning of this, we sort of touched on it in the beginning of the podcast. I've had some of the old school teachers, like when I was in high school, I studied with Homer Mensch, this sort of like epic, 20th century New York teacher, he's Jaws by himself.
Right. That's right.
Right in the gas chamber at Rikers Island. Yeah. He said it was this crazy, talk about a crazy gig story, like you write about.
Oh, wow.
But we have these epic people. They play with all these conductors, and I don't know. It's just documentation. These people. We're all just here for such a short amount of time. Imagine how many great musicians. And in some ways, all my playing that I have on the podcast, this is in perpetuity. This is be me forever. And somehow in the beginning, I thought of this later, just a second ago. I didn't monetize it so much. Maybe we looked forward, like, in the old days, people would make a recording and then they would sell it and then they would make money and all that, the old traditional recording style. But maybe by that point we sort of saw, because I remember the recital was in iTunes.
Yeah.
I remember at least the beginning, all this stuff was in iTunes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I remember. Yeah. It's still in iTunes.
But we have that, and I'm also working on it's difficult to do a book. I have my own sort of book project. It's more sort of, in general as far as playing and music. So that's coming in the pipeline. It's hard to organize a book, though. It's sort of kind of one of the hardest things to do. But that's something else. But I just want to put that on record, is that I'm working on it, and I'm going to do it because it's a great idea. It's a great topic.
First, I'd like to say congratulations on the 10th anniversary of Contra-Bass Conversation. Hi, Jason. My name is Jay Starks, and I live in the New York metropolitan area. I have studied and played the contrabass for over 20 years. I also teach theory at several prestigious institutions in and around the tri-state area. I work and record with the founder of the Neo Bass Ensemble and renowned jazz bassist Lyles Atkinson, who has performed with jazz greats such as Nina Simone, Benny Carter, Mary Lou Williams, and many more. Oh, he should be a featured artist on your show. I'd like to mention that. My first time listening to the Contrabass Conversation, the show December 28, 2016, with Young Chow on overcoming challenges. Great show and very informative. I am hooked. I'm planning on attending the 50th anniversary of the ISB. Hope to speak with you soon.
So we talked about where are we now. Okay, so I think we pretty much covered, that's where we are now, right? So we have the app, we have, can't forget that the blog is still there. That's more of a, writing medium.
Right.
But it seems like everything's sort of, you've always sort of been sort of podcast-centric, I think. I mean, it's always been the center.
Well, I have, and here's why, I'd love your thoughts on this, but for me, writing, the act of writing, while I love writing, I actually enjoy writing, although writing a book is challenging, like you were talking about. That is it's so much more challenging than just maintaining a blog. I feel like the podcast is really helpful. I feel like it's something that is adding value to the world. And I don't necessarily feel that about my writing all the time. I enjoy writing, and I'm a pretty decent writer, but I don't have that same feeling when I get done writing something. Sometimes I feel like it's maybe went in a direction it's not even helpful at all. It's just my brain sort of letting off steam. And while I still do it, every time I do one of these podcasts, I get off the phone or I get off of Skype, and I think that was the best hour I could have spent with my time. That was the best thing I could have done. And then I get the added benefit of putting it out into the world for thousands of people. So to me, that's why as soon as I started doing the podcast and as soon as I started interviewing people with you and interviewing you for it, I could feel that value every time I pushed the save button.
And I think this goes back to what I said at the beginning. I think the intention of this has always been educational.
Yeah.
Positive, educational, and it was to serve people, and whether it's entertaining or they can incorporate it into their musical life and stuff. I mean, so I think that gives a lot of energy to it. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting with the book. I heard Colin Powell say once, I would write a book if I could ever figure out how to do the framework of it.
Right.
I mean, you have all this information, but what's important about that is, I'll never forget, there's a famous quote that says, "To tell you what I think, I need to read you what I wrote." Love that.
Oh, I like that quote. Yeah.
Jason Heath, the man, the king, the genius. This is Justin Locke. How you doing? For those of you who don't know me, I'm the author of Real Men Don't Rehearse. And if you're a bass player and you haven't read this book, what can we say, really? Anyway, thank you very much for having me on the show, both back in 2008 and this year. I really appreciate the opportunity to promote myself and congratulations to you, and good on you, mate, because you're really becoming kind of this community overlord. What's the term here? You just kind of become this shaman of bass playing. You're really like and we need community these days. We really need something that just sort of gets commonality going for everybody, and and you provide that. You really do. So congratulations, and thanks again for having me on the show. And I watch you with great admiration. This is great stuff. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, now let's go to phase 3 here. Okay, where are we going? So we had an interesting discussion about this earlier, and even from the beginning, and coming from some of my, different people that were commenting on all this stuff, it's like, what's the environmental impact? So to me, and by that I don't mean that in terms of how does this spread into the world? So how do we use this, this incredibly powerful medium? Mm-hmm. That's this, we used to call it new media in the old days. That term seems to be kind of back. So you have this podcast. We have this medium right now we're talking. It's going to be broadcast across the whole globe. You could be on top of a mountain in Africa. You could be in Australia. Mm-hmm. You could be in Tehran.
Yep.
Kazakhstan. There was one person, there's an island off of Panama.
Yep.
And it's how do we use all this medium where this, music can carry on this, ideas, philosophy, and how do we translate that into the physical world,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was always like, I'm a conductor too, so I'm, a real universal musician. That's the way, I'm a bass player, but I see myself as like a universal musician. So I usually wear my conductor's hat, mm-hmm. People play for me all different instruments. I teach lessons, whatever, coachings. And I also, I try to do, a lot of consulting, with orchestras. I like to do personal coaching, which is some sports psychology, like mental preparation. Mm-hmm. And then I like to do organizational work, Mm-hmm. I want to use this medium, to translate into, rebooting our orchestra industry, opera industry, in the arts in general. Yeah. So that's one of my sort of general goals for the future. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I like that the phrase you use, like taking this and translating it into the physical world, and that's something I think about a lot too. Is how and that's what's so cool when that's why events like going to the bass convention in Prague in 2016 and going to ISB and Ithaca coming up in 2017. Those are such important events to me because it's sort of this digital world of this podcast and all that. I feel like I'm continuing the conversation in the physical world when I run into people. I swear I ran into a couple of players that I've only known online, right, in Prague. We've never met in person. And we just essentially continued the conversation we'd started online. And that's remarkable to me that's the world we live in right now. I mean, it's really cool. It can be an alienating world for sure, but it's also at its best, this technology unites us in a really special way. And I see this as a way to ultimately bring people together, and bring people together in the physical world is a huge part of that. And I don't know what that means, like getting more focused. I don't know if that means that we'll have an event. In fact, you know what? We will have an event. I'm just going to say that right now. After the 10...
Remember we were talking about the kids. Yeah. I'm going to have a conference. Yeah. Like a music innovation conference.
Yeah. This is going to start to take on a physical shape.
We can't release details right now. I got to work out some details.
Yeah.
So you're going to be you'll be the featured speaker, but some of the other guests that I would like, I think this whole concept of music innovation is so important.
Yeah.
Because, there's a lot of roadblocks to this. I don't want to get into this because it's a whole other discussion, but, we're mobile, we're basically becoming a mobile culture,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with tickets, look, you can go to the movies, some symphony, maybe Starbucks, whatever. Everything's going to be, you could just have your phone. Tickets, donations, that kind of stuff, social networking type stuff is important because, I can't get into this because I'll talk about this for 1,000 hours. But,
right.
And a couple other things, because this goes to another thing. Like, I ran into a friend of mine from high school who said, John, I tried to listen to your podcast. He said they were so advanced and technical. He's not a musician at all. So. Right. Another thing we could do with this is we should have a couple basic music episodes where we say, this is a scale, like an introduction to music. If this is how you go to play an instrument, or that's not under the bass blog, but I think we're just talking about this whole umbrella is how do we use this modern media, to advance our cause in our industry. I think there's a lot of potential there, and it would be interesting to get feedback on how people feel about that.
Hey, Jason, this is Mitch Moehring, teacher, player, repairer of the double bass. Wanted to call and wish you a happy 10th anniversary with the podcast. I remember when the podcast came out. It came out midway through college while I was getting my music education degree at Northwestern State University. I began experimenting and repairing instruments while I was, playing and also learning to teach. It was great to hear others dork out and just hear people talk about how much they love the instrument, whether it was repair or playing or teaching of the bass. So it's great to have the podcast, especially how many are coming out these days. Most mornings I can come out and listen to a podcast while I'm working in the shop, which is really nice. I've shared this podcast with my students on our way to different bass symposiums or workshops. And thank you so much. Look forward to another 10 years. So see you at ISB, Jason.
Well, it's definitely a strain, like getting back into this and looking at like what are some of the common, what are people asking for help with? What are people struggling with? What are the topics that keep on coming up again, whether with guests or whether people emailing me or that kind of thing. And just the struggle of finding your path as a musician, the musical entrepreneurship or whatever you want to call it. That is just something that I have seen so much more focus on now in this second generation of the podcast than early on. I mean, in a way, like my Road Warrior Without an Expense Account book, that kind of was where I ended up at the end of that book. It was kind of the dilemma of the modern musician who doesn't get an orchestra job, but broader than that, just the dilemma of the modern musician, whether you're in an orchestra or not. And the conclusion of that book was just, we need to get better at looking at ourselves as entrepreneurs, which is something that people are talking about a lot now, not so much back in 2008 when that book came out, but that's something I've heard again and again. So I think going forward, this is not going to turn into a podcast on musical entrepreneurship. There are others that do that, and that's not my goal, but that is a thread that I find people are finding a lot of value in.
Well, you also had that Music Innovators series.
Yeah.
So don't forget that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was another thing. Yeah, exactly.
But I think in some ways this is a microcosm of what the music business is, because look, we have all these recordings. Look how enthusiastic the people about. Look, we're coming up on, what is it, millions of downloads, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm like, give Ed Barker 10,000. All the stuff that I did, 200,000.
Yeah.
188 countries. There's enthusiasm for this. Like, look, everybody loves music.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said this since I was young, and I said everybody loves music. Now, somehow, when you're a musician, we get beat down. You go through times where the money's tough, and you get rejected. The rejection is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we always have to come back to just the power of music. Look at what music is in the world. How important. How it touches people on the most deepest level.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
So how could some of this? It's just energy. This is vibrational energy. Music has been around, on the earth ever since the cavemen used to jump around and dance and clap their hands.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree.
I just feel strongly about it.
Yeah.
I just don't understand. I don't understand. Look at the success of this. Look how this. Look, this is success in the music business.
Mm-hmm.
Look, that's getting more sort of philosophical, but that's important too. But another thing, we should talk about that new project we were talking about with the similar to the bike training, fitness training for practicing app.
Yeah.
Plus some virtual reality. Let's throw that out there, see what comes back about it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the exciting thing about like where we're going, right? And this whole like being on the cusp of virtual reality becoming, really a major part of our lives. And even like the auto, and again, we could talk about this for hours, but I live here in San Francisco. Uber is now doing self-driving cars in San Francisco, right? That just happened this week. So just the automation and then the virtual reality and the impact that that's going to have on everything, and including what we do here, is just tremendous. Yeah. Do you want to talk about tell folks about the idea you were talking about with like the training?
Yeah, well, I was at the gym, and somebody was getting off, one of the machines, and they took a picture with their iPhone. And I said, I was joking with them, what is that for your wife? Or you feel guilty, or you have to prove you were here or something? We're kind of laughing. And he told me about, I won't mention any specific name, but it was this fitness app, and how you could, your friends, you could have challenges, and you show them the course you did, and where it was, and then and then your friends could check in, and you sort of not compete against each other, but you just use it for inspiration and stuff. And I said, wow, wouldn't that be a cool thing in music for like rehearsals and practicing and preparation and stuff? This is just in the total just idea genesis phase. But imagine before an audition, you could have 20 or recitals. Everybody has their recitals or juries, 20, 25 people. You could check in on what everybody's doing. Oh, hey, I practiced 2 hours. You practiced 3 hours. Then they could send it to me, you could send it to me. I could listen to it, and then I could help you with your practicing or whatever. I think that's kind of neat. But as far as the virtual reality goes, I was watching, when you did this David Moore, this is the second one, and I watched his videos at New World. Those are really awesome. And me and David were at Tanglewood together back in the day. Well, I was only 19. I was just a baby. He was awesome. I remember watching him play. But I loved his videos, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to have from the perspective of the teacher's eyesight? It'd be really cool. For some reason I thought that. So imagine Dave, somehow we get hooked up. You're out in San Francisco. Get somebody one of those Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Get one of those Google eyeglasses or something, and have David do a couple videos where you could watch his bow from his eyesight, and then he could look to the left, and you could see his hand position, and he could talk about his fingerings and stuff. Wow, that'd be cool. And then you can go back to your own bass, and you can go out and incorporate it to your own playing, from the visual standpoint of the teacher. I think that'd be kind of neat. That could be with, whether it's violin or cello, or you can get from the eyesight of the teacher.
Yeah.
Because we always try to do that. When you're in a lesson, you take the bass and you play. You're still looking at it from like a different angle, like an audience sort of interpretation. Anyway, that's some future projects. But
I love that idea because I find myself doing that in lessons that I'm teaching, trying to get the student to kind of like stand behind me to sort of see it from my perspective. It's never right though. You can never have that. I love that idea of seeing it from the teacher's perspective, looking down, looking at the bow, looking at the left hand. And yeah, I feel like we're on the cusp of something unimaginably great in terms of how we're going to learn and grow in the future. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and it's hard in music to incorporate this stuff. I don't know. Sometimes you bring up ideas and stuff, but somehow in music, maybe because it's so ethereal, it just sort of slips by people. Well, Jason, look, this has been awesome today. We wish you the best of luck in the future, and I think the feedback's important too. So if anybody you feel touched or moved or inspired by any of these things, even about some of these future projects, let me know. We'll work together.
Yeah, that would be great. And John, I just got to say, I just appreciate so much everything you've done over the years. I can't even begin to express that. I dedicated my new book to you. That's the least I could do. We've created something great here together. And so I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the great work we've done together. And I hope that I can have you on the podcast for the 20th anniversary. That would be outstanding.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Just imagine where we'll be by then.
I know. Exactly.
Hey, Jason, it's Lloyd. This is going to be a fairly long message, so feel free to do whatever you would like to do with it. No worries. When I told my father at the age of 20 that I wanted to study the bass, he told me, I don't care what you do as long as you put one foot in front of the other and walk in a direction. It may not lead where you expect, but it will take you somewhere. In hindsight, I would add 2 more points to his advice. 1, walk in a direction that you are passionate about. And 2, go with an attitude of service. Putting these principles into action, I believe there is a strong probability for 2 outcomes. The first, a unique success in your chosen field. And second, making a significant contribution to your community. When I think of you, Jason, I see these principles in action over and over again. I see someone who started out by loving the bass, and that person has grown into someone passionate about learning, growing, teaching, and evolving, both as a bassist and as a human being. And most importantly, passionately desires to be of service to his fellow humans and bass players all over the world. These podcasts, in my opinion, reflect this attitude of service by being open to every aspect of what it is to be a growing, changing bassist and person. There is always a refreshing sense of discovery, support, sincere interest, passion, and fun, along with great knowledge, information, technique, and unique personalities on tap at Contrabass Conversations. What a great contribution to our world community. Here's to the next decade. Cheers, Jason.
It was so great to look back with John at the past, the present, and the future. And I've got a couple final thoughts as I look toward the future for this endeavor. And first off, I believe in audio. I believe in the audio format for this kind of content that you're listening to. This kind of content, I really think it's meant to be consumed as you do other things. And as you heard with Lloyd, how he listens while practicing yoga, or Mitch as he works in the shop, this is how most people consume podcasts and are consuming these podcasts. They're commuting, they're working out, they're doing the dishes, they're walking the dog, they're warming up. And this kind of thing is what audio is perfect for. Now, having said that, I definitely see myself moving more into the video realm. And that does not mean replacing the audio podcast. That's the core of what I do. I'm really passionate about it. And I just love doing these. And I think that's the way to deliver these. Not video, but audio. But I do see finding ways to complement what I'm doing in audio with video. You may have seen these experiments with my weekly update episodes, which I'm taking up a notch big time in terms of production starting this week. So look forward to that and expect to see a lot of experimentation in the video realm from me going ahead with this project. And I'm also looking for more ways to distill and to synthesize what I learn in these conversations and provide some clarity and help people through inspirational, educational content. And you saw this with Winning the Audition, the series and the book this year, and expect to see more projects like this on a regular basis. I don't know if I'll do it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, not sure yet. Again, I'm in the experimental phase right now, so you'll probably see some wacky ideas coming from me, things way out of left field, and I'd love your feedback on what you think is useful. And that's going to do it for the first episode in the second decade of Contrabase Conversations. And whether this is your first or your 294th episode, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.